Welcome to Mishna study, Masechet Terumot, Perek Aleph Mishnah He. Over here in this Mishnah, we're going to continue speaking about what are you not allowed to separate Teruma from. So in last Mishnah, we spoke about you're not allowed to separate olives to cover olive oil and grapes to cover wine. Over here, we're going to speak about different statuses of fruit. You'll see what I mean in a second, that you're not allowed to separate Teruma from. And over here again, even if you did so, right? Look at the last line of Mishnah, Vim Tanu and Terumatan Teruma, it doesn't count at all. So what are these things? Firstly, en tormim min adleket, min hashikha, min hape'ah, min hayefker. You're not allowed to separate teruma, right? Let's say you have a field that you harvested. You have all the figs in the field, right? And now you go ahead and there's the corner of the field, right? Or some pieces fell, right? You have a field of wheat, right? You're ready to give teruma from that wheat, and you had some leket, right? Some leket that fell off, that belongs to Aniyim, Shikha, right? A bundle that you forgot, Pe'ah, the corner of the field. You want to go ahead and separate this. I'm going to separate this leket. I'm going to use this Pe'ah and give this as Teruma to the Kohen. No, you're not allowed to do that. That doesn't work, right? You can't cover your produce from what belongs to the Aniyim. Nor are you allowed to use Min HaHefker, right? Let's say you have Hefker. So let's say you found something. You had figs. You found a basket of figs out in the yard, in the street. Right, you take those figs, you bring them into your house, and they're yours. Say, oh, you know what? I'm going to use these figs. I'm going to give these figs to the Kohen and cover the other figs that I have that I just picked and harvested to pick from my tree. You allowed to do that? No, you're not allowed to do that either. You're not allowed to use hefker, right? Hefker, right? An ownerless fruit that you found that you took into your house. You're not allowed to use that to cover your other fruit, right? Technically, you could have thought this could have been allowed. And Rambam points out, this is it's something that belongs to anyone. It's mutar lechol adam. But the pasuk says, we learn it from the pasuk, ki en lo chelek v'nahala imach. The Kohen doesn't have any land, right? Any portion of territory with you. And they learn in the Yerushalmi, mimash yesh lecha ve'en lo ten. Something that you have that he doesn't have, right? A nahala, a field, right? Kohanim don't have they're not owners of fields. Right, so that you have to give teruma from your field. Right, this comes to exclude hefker, where both of you have the same opportunity to hefker. Right, something that's ownerless, you're allowed to pick it up, he's allowed to pick it up. It's the same thing. Right, so you don't separate from hefker over your other items. Rambam is gores shelo. Right, other Rishonim don't, other people don't have this girsa. But Rambam says you're not allowed to separate from Ma'aser Rishon, and the way he explains this is, let's say the Levi had his own field. A Levi has a field, plus he received some produce from Israel. So he has two sources of produce: one from his own field, and second that he received as Ma'aser. So from both of these, he's gonna have to separate teruma, right? From his field, he's going to have to separate regular teruma, and he also has to separate terumat ma'aser, right? You have to separate both, the regular teruma plus the teruma from the ma'aser, right? Even though he's Levi, right? He could keep the ma'aser for himself, but he has to separate teruma from that ma'aser. So you're separating teruma twice. From the produce that he receives from Israel, he got ma'aser as a gift because he's Levi, he got it from Israel. He only needs to separate terumat ma'aser from that. So let's say he has now the ma'aser rishon, right? He has the ma'aser rishon that he received from someone else, and he says, "Oh, let me separate the teruma from this produce, and I'll cover both this produce and the produce from my field. I'll cover both batches." So you're not allowed to separate from this ma'aser rishon, right, that he receives from someone else. Shelo nitela terumato, right, that it's terumat ma'aser only wasn't taken from it yet. Right, terumato over here, according to Rambam, would mean the terumat ma'aser. He didn't separate the terumat from. You're not allowed to separate this, right, from this batch to cover your own field, right? The Levi's own field, that teruma and terumat ma'aser weren't taken from it yet, because again, you're not allowed to separate, terumat ma'aser to cover your regular first teruma. Also, similarly, right? If you have ma'aser sheni, right, fruits that you're going to take up to eat in Jerusalem, or hekdesh, something that was donated to the Beit HaKabai, to the Beit HaMikdash, they weren't redeemed yet. You can't go ahead and use this and give it to the Kohen as teruma. Right? If you have something that's hayav, you have teruma perot, that are hayav in teruma gedolah, and you have other fruits that are not hayav in the teruma gedolah. You're not allowed to separate from one on the other. Velo mina hapatur al hayav, nor vice versa. You can't separate, right? The opposite also. Velo mina talush al mechubar, velo mechubar al talush. Let's say you had some that were picked already, and some that was still connected to the ground. You can't go ahead and separate from teruma, from the fruits that were picked, and say, oh, I'm going to cover the ones that are still attached to the ground, that are still growing on the tree. You're not allowed to do that, or vice versa. You can't get from the ones on the tree to cover the ones that you picked already. Velo mina hadash al yashan, velo mina yashan al hadash. You're not allowed to separate from old onto new and new onto old. Right? Why not? Over here, we're not allowed to separate from one year onto the next. Right? Each year, we need to separate teruma appropriately. The pasuk says, "Vaharemotem mimenu terumat Adonai." Right? From itself, you need to separate. Right? From its year, not from a different year. If you have fruits from Eretz Israel, you can't use those to cover fruits that were from outside of Israel, or vice versa, from fruits that are outside of Israel that may be hayav and terumot masot from Syria. You're not allowed to use those to cover fruits of Eretz Israel. Vim tarmu and terumatam teruma. Right? First of all, why are you allowed from ones from Israel also? Right? Why can't you use from Chutz Haaretz to Eretz Israel and vice versa? The pasuk says, "V'chol ma'asar haaretz mizer haaretz." Haaretz, right? Also, if it's from the land, you have to go ahead and give from the land. Now, Rambam just points out some of these pesukim, right? Specifically, when it says right, we're talking about the Asham by Hadash. You're not allowed to separate new over old and old over new. We learned it from the pasuk. Right, you have to separate mimenu, right, from this year. We said Terumat Hashem. So Rambam points out, what are you talking about? That pasuk is not talking about teruma. That pasuk is talking about Terumat Ma'aser. If you look at that parasha, at the end of Parashat Korach, we're reading in a couple of weeks, look at it, it's talking about Terumat Ma'aser. When the Levi gets his Ma'aser, he needs to separate 10% of what he received as Teruma. What are you telling me that you're not allowed to separate this year onto last year onto this year? It's not talking about Teruma, it's talking about Terumat Ma'aser. And he goes, Enze kashe. This is not a kushya. Why? Because sometimes we learn from Terumot onto Ma'asrot, and Ma'asrot onto Terumot. Right, according to, right, because they're all talking about the same thing, right? The same idea, it's the same function, right? When we give teruma, when we give ma'aser, right, it's all the same function, that giving, and that's why the fishik talam inyan echad, right? Right, whatever it may be, the rule is that we're really just separating, and that's so we're allowed to learn from one thing to the next. And the last line, Mishna, if you did so, it does not count at all. Right, it doesn't count at all. Next Mishnah, we're going to focus on people that are not allowed to give, and then we'll talk about items that you're not supposed to give from. But if you did so, it does count. Right, so the first 5 Mishnah spoke about, right, you're not allowed to separate teruma, and if you did so, it doesn't even count. The next half of the perek, we're going to speak about if you did so, right, but the avad, it would count.